Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. In today's video, I'll be using Honeybee Stamp's Lovely Layers Dianthus die set, their fancy fall layering frames. For a sentiment, I have their Be Still stamps and coordinating dies, and for pattern paper, using one of my favorites, Grain and Grunge. I did end up losing just a tiny bit of the video. There was a windstorm going on and my power flickered. But the only thing you missed is me showing the two pattern papers and putting adhesive on the back of this smaller panel. I used the fancy fall layering frames for both of the wood grain pattern paper pieces. I'm wrapping some rose gold metallic cord around the darker panel. To help hold the end in place, I first put ATG tape on the back, but it wasn't quite strong enough. So I did add a piece of double-sided adhesive tape. Then I wrap the cord around the bottom portion of this panel. To make sure that cord stays in place, I'll add another piece of double-sided adhesive tape on both sides. I will be popping up this panel using Honeybee Stamp's black foam strips. I'll add some foam along the outside edge of the die cut panel. There are some notched areas on the die cut piece, so I was trying to make sure to add the foam where it wouldn't be visible through the notch. And I'll also add a few strips on the inside, that way there isn't one area that sags. Once I have good coverage, I'll remove the release paper and add this panel on the center of the background piece. This is an American Standard A2 size card, 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. It's hard to see in the video, but since I cut out that background piece using one of the fancy fall layering frames, it does have a lovely etched detail frame all along the outside. Sometimes when you cut out paper using dies, it can warp the very edge of the paper. I want to make sure it lays nice and flat, so I will be adding some extra adhesive on the back side. I'll first put some double-sided adhesive tape. This is the 1/4 inch width. I'll remove the release paper. Now I'll put a tiny bit of Barely Art glue along that very outside edge. I'll also add a little bit of adhesive in the center of this panel. When I adhere my card front onto a card base, I'll press a little more on the very outside edge, and now that panel will lay nice and flat on my card. I'll set aside my card and start working on the flower. I've already gone ahead and cut out all of the pieces for the Dianthus flower. Decided to go with a pretty red. There are 3 different sizes of flower blooms. And when I cut out all of the pieces, I made sure to keep the separate flowers in a different row. Now it does look a little intimidating with all those different pieces, but Honeybee Stamps makes it really easy to use their lovely layer sets. On their website, they do have a layering guide. I'm adding a little extra ink on the center of all of the petal pieces using Catherine Pooler's Rouge ink color. It's a slightly darker red color. Once I've inked up the die cut piece, I'm still trying to keep all those flowers in separate rows. I have just a couple more pieces. I'm using Honeybee Stamp's smallest blending brush to do the inking, and I have all of those pieces on a mini stencil mat. Now it's time to assemble the 3 flowers. And here's a quick look at the layering guide. It really does make it super easy to assemble the lovely layer die sets. I'm starting with the largest flower, and all 3 of the flowers have 5 layers. You can use the same cardstock color like I'm doing. You could have 5 different shades of red cardstock for your flowers. Pattern paper is also a fun option. I know some people like to use white cardstock, and then they'll use a variety of different mediums to color the flowers. I always have a ton of scrap pieces of cardstock, so I do tend to dig through my cardstock drawers when assembling the lovely layer flowers. The last 2 flowers are about the same size. They both have the 5 layers. I love all the beautiful etched detail on the flowers and also the leaves. And I'll be showing the leaves and the stem here in a moment. I have one final flower to assemble. And to make sure I didn't lose all those small die cut pieces, I did store them in one of scrapbook.com's stack and sort trays. I have another tray with the leaves and the stem. Now I'll set aside the 3 flowers and start working on the leaves. There are 7 leaves that you can cut out separately, and there's also a few leaves on the very background piece with the stem. I'm adding a little extra ink just to the 7 cutout pieces. I'm using Catherine Pooler's Eucalyptus Ink color. I used a light green cardstock color for the stem and leaves. I wanted to make sure it had good contrast against the dark brown background of the card. Now I'll start gluing all of the individual leaves on that background piece with the stem. There are a few leaves on that background piece that don't have the individual leaf piece. You could go and add ink to those as well, but I decided to leave them plain. Gives it a little more variety of greens on the background. I'm using a pair of reverse tweezers to hold the small die cut pieces. And one by one, I'll glue down all those small leaf pieces. And before the glue dries, I'm making sure all of those leaves are lined up evenly. I have just one final leaf to attach. Now I'll glue down all 3 of the red flowers. The largest one goes at the very bottom. And if you have all those pieces lined up correctly, it fits perfectly between the cutout leaves. For the small flower on the left side, I'm trying to make sure to line it up perfectly with the background so you're not seeing any of the green peek out behind the red flower. Once I've glued down all of the individual leaves and red flowers, I'll put glue on the back of the Dianthus and adhere it on my card. And I'm putting it at a slight angle. I want to leave a little extra space in the lower right hand corner since that's where I'll add the sentiment. I'll be stamping the sentiment on more of the green and grunge pattern paper. Selected a very light wood grain design. Stamp the sentiment thinking of you. And I'm using my mini MISTI to make sure I get a good solid impression. Now I'll use the coordinating honey cut dies to cut out the sentiment. Pulled out my bitty buzz cutter. I'll hold the die in place using some tacky tape. Run it through my die cut machine, and I love how it cuts that perfect border around the sentiment. I will be popping it up with some foam dimension using Honeybee Stamp's white foam strips. And I did cut a little sliver of one of the strips, that way it would fit behind the sentiment. I'll also add some teeny tiny pieces on the top and bottom areas of the sentiment. Now I'll remove the release paper and adhere the sentiment in the lower right hand corner underneath the larger red flower. I am adhering it on top of the rose gold metallic cord, so I'm trying to make sure there are areas where it's attached to the card as well. For embellishments, I'm using Honeybee Stamp's Warm Pearls. Selected the darkest brown color. I'll put 2 in the upper left-hand corner and 3 around the sentiment in the lower right-hand corner. They do have adhesive on the back, but I like to add just a small drop of glue to make sure they don't pop off later. For a final finishing touch, thought it would be fun to have some sparkly red flowers. I'm using a red glitter brush from scrapbook.com and I'll color all 3 of the flowers. It'll give them a slightly darker red look and lots of sparkle. And being careful not to get any of the marker on the green leaves since the red glitter brush does have a red color to it. Once the marker starts to dry, I'll go over any areas that I missed, and once it dries completely, it has this beautiful sparkle finish. Here's a similar card I made earlier, and you can see all that lovely sparkle on the red flowers. I love how this card turned out. The green and red from the flower really pops against the dark brown background. If you are interested in any of the products I used in this video, I do have links in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.